Good morning. Well, it's at least morning for me. It's early in the morning. I just got home from volunteering at a homeless shelter. In the middle of a pandemic, after a year of social unrest, wildfires, natural disasters, we still have homeless. We have hunger. We have a lot of problems in this world. It may seem odd that I'm here to talk to you about joy, but it's really not that weird. Joy is often connected with unpleasant things. It's hard to even talk about joy because we can't define it very well. It's hard to understand. It needs to be experienced rather than just studied. It's not something you can take apart and analyze. But there are a couple of things that I want you to catch from the book of Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah brought a group of people back from Babylon after the captivity to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And it was a great undertaking, but they also had a lot of enemies, and it was hard work. And in fact, the people that worked on the walls would take weapons with them to work, just in case somebody attacked. It wasn't a very fun time. But in the 8th chapter of Nehemiah, yes, 8:10, he said that the joy of the Lord is your strength. He had declared a feast to celebrate God's goodness. And he said, the joy of the Lord is your strength. Now, there are two things I want you to understand from that. Number one, joy comes from God. That's the only source of it. It is His gift to us. Now, I'm not saying that only Christians can have joy. It's a gift that He gives to everybody, all of His people. I mean, all of the people He created, just like He gives the sunrise. The next thing is that it's strength. It's not some mamby-pamby, weak, sentimental emotion. It is strength. It's the thing that gives us the power to go on. It's the thing that gives us hope. And without hope, we're lost. So remember, joy is from God, and joy is your strength. Now, beyond that, I couldn't really find anything in Scripture that would help us analyze or understand joy. Joy really needs to be experienced rather than studied. So, I chose 3 examples from my own life where I remember experiencing joy. Now, there have been a lot of others, but these 3 illustrate the points. The first one was when I was a little boy. So this is probably about 60 years ago. And you got to understand a little bit. Times have changed. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't even have cordless phones. In fact, the plug that went into the wall from the phone, there wasn't really a plug. You had to wire it in with a screwdriver. So you couldn't carry the phone. You couldn't take the phone any further than the cord that hooked it to the wall. And most of those cords were only about 6 feet. So my mother didn't like that. We had a large living room, and Mom thought she should be able to sit anywhere in that living room and talk on the phone. Now, my mother, when she got an idea of something she wanted done, it got done. That's just who she was. So she hunted down a cord that was long enough for her. I think it was probably at least 25 feet. And so she could go anywhere in the room and talk on the phone. Life was good. But there was a downside, and that was a 25-foot long cord gets tangled up. So there was a firm rule in our house. We kids did not play with the phone cord. We left it neatly coiled behind the little stand that the phone was on, and we did not mess with it. except one time. I don't know how. I don't know how it happened. I don't know why it happened. I don't know what possessed my mother to think that this was a good idea, but it was great. One time, I remember when I was a little boy, my mother twirling that cord from one end and one of my older sisters twirling it from the other end, and the rest of us were jumping rope. I remember laughing hysterically until my sides hurt because it was just so random. It was so out of character for my mother, who was usually quite serious. Looking back, I remember the joy. Now you may be thinking, oh, you just really like to jump rope. No, I didn't. I didn't care about jumping rope. I usually tripped over it, and I was kind of a klutz. And it just wasn't something that I cared about. What I cared about, what brought the joy, was the relationship. I was playing with my mom and my sisters, and we were having a great time. The next thing I want you to understand about joy is that it's about relationship. In my life, I don't remember any time experiencing joy outside of being connected with a relationship. Sometimes that relationship was with other people, most of the time. Sometimes it's just with God. Times when you feel so close to Him, when in prayer and reading, in whatever activity. That is where the joy comes. So, number one, joy is from God. Number two, it is strength. Number three, it's tied to relationships. The next example, a few years later, I was probably about the time I started high school. So it's about 50 years ago. And I was invited to a party at a youth group from another church. Now, while it was from another church youth group, I still knew all the kids. This is a small town. You knew everybody. But I didn't really feel like I fit in with other kids. I didn't have a lot of close friends, very few. And I felt like most kids at school really didn't like me. They picked on me, and I wasn't good at sports, and I was kind of a nerd. And I got made fun of and all that. It wasn't it wasn't a fun time for me. But I remember on the way to that party, as I was walking toward the Methodist Church in Elgin, Oregon, I remember making a decision. And that was, I was going to be myself. I was not going to try to get anybody to like me. Now, I wanted people to like me. And so sometimes I'd try to be more like them, or try to be cool. And I decided on the way to that church that I was not going to do any of that. I was going to be myself, and if they liked me, fine. I didn't even care if I had fun. I was just going to relax and be myself. Looking back, I don't remember anything that happened at that party, but I remember the walk home. I remember thinking, that was the best party I have ever been to. The next point I want you to remember is joy comes from honest relationships. If you're trying to make yourself look good, you're not going to experience much joy. If you're trying to advance yourself, if you're trying to act like you're something you're not going to have much joy, because it's not an honest relationship. Joy comes from honest relationships. The third example, and the last, is going to maybe surprise you a little bit, because it involves some discomfort, some pain. I had just started working with Impact, and I'd only been to about 2 or 3 meetings, and I was asked to go to summer camp. Now, I was driving a van full of junior high kids up toward Ojai. And as we went up the freeway, there was this noise behind me, this absolutely pandemonium. It was confusing. I couldn't hear anything other than just a roar of kids laughing and singing and who knows what. And I remember praying silently, saying, God, why am I here? How am I going to build a relationship with these kids when I'm their grandparents' age? A couple of days later, I was helping set up a slip and slide. And I slipped, and I slid, and I broke my leg. And it was pretty spectacular. Everybody heard it. It was a loud snapping noise, and everybody on that activity field heard the bones break. They spun around and they saw me fall. What they didn't know is that as that bone broke, God gave me a message. Now, I didn't hear anything in an audible voice, but I knew exactly what he said. And that was, I did this on purpose. You just sit back and relax and enjoy it. And by the time I hit the ground, that's what I was doing. I was completely resigned that this was God's plan and it was going to be good. And when I hit the ground, I was already feeling joy because I knew that God had his plans and it was okay. Kids were running around trying to, running up to see if there was anything I could do. And I remember people saying, I can't believe you're not more upset. You don't seem to be upset at all. And I said, I could yell and scream if you want, but it's not going to make my leg any straighter, as it was kind of going off at an odd angle. Through that experience, I didn't really like the pain. Nobody should seek out pain. I mean, that's a sign of mental illness. But often, God uses pain in our life to bring something wonderful. I told you that I had been concerned about how I would build relationships with kids my grandchildren's age. Let me tell you, the kids who were on that field, when they saw me fall and they heard those bones break, I was their grandpa. And we had a relationship that was wonderful. And it was instant. And in many ways, that relationship has gone through the years, even though the kids in junior high weren't there. But they've heard the stories. And it was something that, a great work that God did. So the third thing I want you to, or the third example, from the third example, I want you to know that pain does not stop joy. In fact, in James 1 verse 2 says, consider it all joy, my brothers, when you experience various trials. He's saying, when you have trouble, count that as joy, because God's working and he will bring those to a good conclusion. That doesn't mean they're going to go away. It doesn't mean there's not going to still be pain. It's been a few years now and I still have pain in that leg, but it's worth it. So in other places too, when in Hebrews chapter 12, it tells us to look to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Pain and joy are not mutually exclusive. You don't have to let pain rob you of joy. What does stop joy? There's only one thing I know absolutely stops joy. If you don't want to have joy, do this. Be selfish. If you want to think only of yourself and you are the most important person in the world and you're trying for everything to work out for you, you won't have joy. Joy comes from relationships. Selfishness breaks relationships. So, the things I want you to remember. Number one, the joy of the Lord. Joy comes from God. Two, the joy of the Lord is our strength. It is what gives us hope. It's what empowers us to stand. Three, it comes from relationships. Four, it comes from honest relationships. You can't lie your way through this. And five is that pain does not stop it. You can have great joy in pain. I want to close with a blessing from Jude 1:24. Now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you blameless before the presence of his glory with great joy.